Hi there, and I think it's time to update the tier list since we are currently in phase 2 of 1.0 update, and of course we have a new character to be put in the tier list. Also, we have lots of changes in terms of positioning to already existing characters just because we are progressing in the game. And of course, if you're talking about week 1 or week 2 tier list, there we were aiming for Trailblaze levels 20 to 40, while currently we can talk about Trailblaze levels 40 to 60, where we have much more opportunities how we can invest into the characters. We can build a proper 5-star relic set, we can build a proper light con where some characters become really shiny while other characters might fall off a bit. And also I want to mention that this tier list, as any other tier list, is of course subjective based on my opinion and my experience. That's why if you disagree on something, just feel free to share your opinion in the comment section, so people who also read the comments will be able to just read the alternative opinion. And without further ado, let's start from something neutrally acceptable, for example Zilla. I think there will be not that much people who argue with Zilla in SS tier currently in the game. I don't think that SS tier is that much different to S tier. Like S tier are already the strongest characters we currently have in the game, while SS tier are like definitely the strongest characters we currently have in the game. And what is good about Zilla? First of all, she is the strongest DPS character which can carry on her own. This means you can invest only in one DPS character if you're, for example, a casual player, you don't care about Memory of Chaos, and you will for sure be able to beat the whole game only with this DPS character. Also, what are her advantages? She revolves around killing the enemies, which is the most natural condition you can find currently in the game. You just kill the enemies and you get additional actions, which is really important because in Memory of Chaos, where you have to get as much actions in one circle so you can finish the battle faster, it's just the main thing you care about. Of course, it's not like only a Memory of Chaos tier list, but we value that a lot since this is like the most endgame activity we currently have in the game. So overall, she's just a strong character, again, especially currently when you already can get a free-to-play light con from her just simulated universe shop, maybe up to superimposition 3 to 5, depending on when you're watching this video. That's why I think she's definitely an SS tier character. Also, I think SS tier characters are Bronya and Tinyun, just because those are like the best supportive characters we currently have in the game, and you always want to use supportive characters. It's much better in terms of your skill points management to support one DPS character than use, for example, 3 DPS characters at the same time in one team. While those two characters are in same SS tier, I think just because we are looking at 5-star characters from perspective of Eidolon 0, while if we are talking about 4-star characters, especially now when everyone is summoning for Genuine and lots of people got Tinyun like E6, E4, E2, E3, she is on the same level just because of this. With Eidolon 1, I think Bronya is much stronger than Tinyun, but again, we only talk about Eidolon 0. In this situation, I think they are a bit different, but really similar in the role which they are playing in your team. So Tinyun again has to use her skill only once in 3 turns, while Bronya, the best scenario is to use every time if it's possible. About their ultimates, I think they are just different. Of course, Bronya's ultimate is really strong, Continuous is really strong too, but you just want to use those ultimates in different scenarios. That's why they are both, to my opinion, are in SS tier. Now let's talk about Jeopard, since currently with an ability to build up a proper defensive 5-star relic set and also find a really good fitting light con for Jeopard, he is an SS tier definitely, especially for the end game, just because in those situations, for example in Memory of Chaos, you still want to use double supportive team where you at the same time use Jeopard and Bailu, for example, or Jeopard and Natasha. And in these situations, if you have a properly built Jeopard, he will be really good. If you're just a casual player who doesn't care about those hard activities, hard battles, and you don't want to invest into Jeopard, then he might be an S or A tier. But again, if you build him properly, he immediately becomes a really strong character, which even can turn on characters like Yanqing without any problem. That's why I think he is currently an SS tier character. Now let's talk about Genuine, and here there might be lots of criticism, but I think that in this scenario where your Genuine is E0 and he has, for example, Seriousness of Breakfast Lightcon, he, in terms of his damage, is S tier character. If you have this character Eidolon 6 with proper light con before dawn, then he might be even above SS tier in terms of his damage, and damage is his main purpose just because he's an erudition character. But again, I think his damage depends a lot on how he is built up in terms of his Eidolons and light con. That's why I want to put him in S tier. For those people who are, for example, free to play, they can't use like at least battle pass light con, or in the best scenario before dawn light con, and then in this scenario his damage is like almost comparable to Serval's damage. I mean, Serval's damage is definitely lower than Genuine's, but she still can compete, because we're talking about Zilla, we don't currently have any other Hunt Quantum character, especially the one which revolves around killing the enemies and getting action points for those. That's why, again, without any competition, Sealy goes to SS tier, while Genuine is in S tier. This doesn't mean he's bad character. Again, S tier is already the strongest characters we currently have in the game. His main problem is that he requires a bit of wailing, and also he has much stronger competition, because we have already Serval, in future we'll have Kafka, they are both lightning element, while like Quantum is a bit low on the units we currently have to deal damage with. Now let's talk about healing characters. We currently have two of those in the game, which are Natasha and Bailu. They are both really good healers. You want to use like either Natasha or Bailu for every of your teams. And why both of them go to S tier, not to SS tier, for example? Just because depending on the situation you want to choose one of those characters. For example, if you need to remove strong debuffs from your allies, you want to use Natasha. But if you have too much of those debuffs, for example, at the same time on the whole team, or you just have too much damage from the enemies, you prefer to use Bailu, which also has, of course, revive. Just because of that, I think it's better to like keep those two in S tier, because depending on the situation, you choose one of those. There is no like the best abundance character currently in the game. Only because of that, I'm putting both of them in S tier. Now let's talk, for example, about Shusheng, which is a hunt physical character, and that's a bit specific. We have not that much physical DPS character, like direct DPS characters currently in the game. And Shusheng is actually really good, especially if you don't have, for example, Quantum Zilla, or you don't have both Zilla and Genuine. You can just use Shusheng easily as your main DPS character. The only her problem is she revolves around breaking. It's not bad to revolve around breaking, but it has some cons. For example, you might lose your broken, like the break on the enemies too fast, or the opposite, you might not break them too much, because like you have to give them a turn to actually recover from break. This is her only like problem, but overall she's a really good character. Also, if you're summoning for Genuine, you might get lots of copies of her, and even if you have Genuine, you still have to use additional like DPS character for your Memory of Chaos. If you don't have Zilla, I think Shusheng might be a really good option to go for and invest into. Now let's talk about Serval, and first of all, if you have Genuine on your account, then Serval immediately becomes C or B tier. But if you're in the scenario where you don't have Genuine, Serval is actually a really solid, first of all, AoE character, and secondly, a lightning character, which you time to time need. So you can easily invest into Serval, because like the next character, if you're skipping Genuine, the next character to come out to be a lightning AoE DPS character is Kafka, and she synergizes with Serval, so you won't like replace your Serval with Kafka, you will combine them. Most likely, again, it's hard to predict this, we don't know how they will rework Kafka, but they might actually work perfectly well, so that's why Serval is actually really good. Again, of course, her damage is incomparable to like the best peak performance Genuine, but she's still okay. Same as Shusheng, they are like the best 4-star DPS characters if you don't have Zilla and Genuine. Now let's talk about Denheng. If you've already invested into Denheng and you, for example, have him E6, he's actually on the same level as Shusheng. The only problem is Shusheng is currently on rate up, that's why you can like relatively easily get her E6, while with Denheng you might have some problems. For example, if he's E0 compared to E4, Shusheng, of course, definitely Shusheng is better. Overall, his condition is a bit harder to like get the best of, because you have by default that cooldown, you can just buff him every turn and get additional damage out of it, while with Shusheng, of course, it's also hard to like consecutively break the enemies or like to keep them broken all the time, but it's easier than Denheng condition, though it's harder and worse than Zila's condition. Of course, that's why I think, like, if we are talking about Denheng in current situation of the game where you can't, like, for sure get him E6, I think he's a B tier. But again, it's only in this situation. If we are talking about equal Shusheng to Denheng, they are basically the same unit of like different condition and different element. Now let's talk about Hook, and she's actually really good, of course, because of the rule which we have in Memory of Chaos, which appreciates using a hunt and erudition characters. We are not using like Hook on regular base, but she is currently the best fire character we have in terms of damage. Of course, in future she might be replaced easily just by any damage dealing 5-star fire character. It might be an erudition character, or maybe a hunt character, or maybe a destruction character. But overall, if you really need second DPS character, again, Hook is 4-star character, that's why it's much easier to get her Eidolons. You could get her E6 on Zila's banner, and also she's a bit easier in terms of resources. You need to actually develop her, that's why she's a good character. But again, if you already, for example, invest into 2 DPS characters, I think it's not that good to invest into 3 at the same time. But if you really want, she's actually good currently. Now let's talk about Asta. I think she's a really good, strong character, and if you don't have at all Tinyun and Bronya, she might be an S tier for you. In general, since we have those 2 characters, I think she is A tier just because of her buffs being not that usable and not that utility as for Tinyun and Bronya. She, at the same time, might act as like weakness breaker against your enemies, which is really cool, and her skill is really universal. You can use it like a single target break effect, or just an AoE thing, which also will increase your damage with her passive. Overall, she lacks a bit in comparison with those 2 characters. This is the only reason why she's in A tier, but I'm easily using her on my free-to-play account. She's a really good supportive character, which you're guaranteed to get just from going through the tutorial. Now let's talk about Clara. I think with Clara it's a bit hard, because if Clara, for example, is your first 5-star and you've already invested into her, you can easily just use her. She's a really good character. She combines like damage and being a tank, so she doesn't require that much skill points. But overall, I think she is already starting to fall off. Maybe I'm mistaken here, maybe in future she will become even more important, but I feel that she will become like less and less relevant. Again, it's only my opinion, and only because of her RNG you have to hope that enemies will attack your Clara. Of course, you can make like the conditions in which enemies will focus your Clara, but it's still random. That's why I think, again, with Clara, it's not that reliable. Of course, it's really cool that you can like combine at the same time a character which can tank and deal damage, but I don't think that she is like a really reliable main DPS character, though she's a perfect character and she can even solo some activities. That's why, of course, no problem with her. Again, maybe it's only because of the rule we have in Memory of Chaos, and right after this rule gone, maybe she will even be on the same level as Sealy, but not currently. Now let's talk about Pela. She is actually a really good character, but only if you can build her properly, because she is a nihility character, so she at the same time has to deal some damage and of course give utility to your team, strip off buffs from the enemies, and overall increase like your damaging potential as sub DPS / supportive character. If you already invested into 2 Harmony characters, I think you just won't have a place for her, but if you are planning to invest into some characters to have 2 teams for your Memory of Chaos, and you don't have, for example, Jeopard, and you don't have Yanqing, and you know that some enemies will need to use like freezing character against them, you can just invest into Pela. She's really good, especially if you was lucky to get 6 additional copies of her on Sealy's banner. About Herta, she really falls off really fast just because she's an erudition character, and with erudition characters, of course, not all of them, but you just don't want to use them compared to other DPS characters. She again is like at the same time power crept with other better erudition characters and overall like paths which are better at dealing damage. Also, her condition is like to lower the enemy's HP under 50%, which means you have to deal damage, and then only Herta starts dealing damage. At the start of the game, it's really cool. You see like those videos where people just use one button and then like at the same time Herta and Himeko just destroy all the enemies with their passives. But it's not that reliable in real situations, except against farming, where you actually can do basically the same with Zilla. You just set an auto and go do something, then you return and reset your auto, or when you run out of stamina, you do something else. So overall, you just don't need Herta currently. Again, it might change, but I don't think that, like, maybe if they release some kind of bosses which you consecutively want to break, like, literally every turn, and you rely on breaking those, like, how we can say, iconic erudition characters might shine, but currently, like, the only two really strong erudition characters are those who are good at dealing damage overall, and follow-up attacks are not the thing which they only rely on. Of course, with Lightning Lord, he's completely different because he doesn't have conditions, you don't have to break enemies, you don't have to get them to below 50% of HP. But with Herta, and same as with Himeko, they unfortunately have those conditions. That's why I think they're not that good currently. If you're talking about Himeko, again, if we have some activity where we have to revolve around breaking the enemies, Himeko might be a really good unit. For example, you deal lots of damage to all the enemies, then you break all of them at the same time. You use your passive of Himeko, then you break them again at the same time. This might work, but again, not currently. Maybe in future we will get some new light cons which make Himeko shine, but unfortunately not currently. Now let's finish with our erudition characters, talking about Chinche. This is the only quantum option of DPS which you currently may have if you skipped or missed Sealy, and at this point she might be an A tier for you because she is also a good solid AoE character, with only problem she relies on RNG. If your RNG is bad, if you're unlucky, she might be average in terms of damage, but again, it really depends on you. Like, she might show a really good numbers or just like an average mid numbers of damage depending on what's your RNG. You can fix that with rushing your ultimate, but it's really hard to do this. Like, anyway, any DPS character wants to use their ultimate as much as possible, that's why it's really hard to operate with her. And also she might be power crept with Silver Wolf. Again, they have different role, but Silver Wolf in theory might turn on additional weaknesses to the enemy, and then you don't have to use like quantum DPS character. If, for example, you don't have Sealy, you can just use Silver Wolf and any other character with any other element, apply additional weakness, just break the enemy with that element. And also you can Silver Wolf, like you can use Silver Wolf as sub DPS, so you don't have to use your main DPS in quantum element. Again, it depends, we don't know how exactly Silver Wolf will work in future. About Trailblazer physical, maybe like it's one of the worst characters we currently have in the game as characters themselves, which you use in battle. Of course, you can switch like Trailblazers just to heal a bit with physical Trailblazer, but overall, like, you don't want to use them just because we have Fire Trailblazer, which is much better. We'll discuss them a bit later in this video. That's why, like, I think this is the only reason why we are not using a physical Trailblazer, just because, like, it takes the spot of Fire Trailblazer. You can't use both of them at the same time. Otherwise, it might be like just a B or A tier character. Again, like average damage, nothing special. We have this like some kind of a choice on the ultimate where we can decide if we want to do single target damage or AoE damage, which is good, but the only reason I actually see is just because we have a fire main character, which is much better. Now let's talk about Yanqing. Actually, this character is really good. I really love how this character works. The only of his problem is, of course, RNG. If you are getting hit, the whole kit of this character is ruined, unfortunately. Also, he relies on his skill points, but again, every DPS character at this point of the game relies on their skill points. That's why I don't think this is like a bad side of this character. The only problem is RNG. Like, if he's just hit one time, he receives damage, your whole idea is ruined, you have to reset all of that. It's kinda slow if you do it like during the battle, not like at the start of the battle. That's why, again, he has problems, I think. At this point, we might say that he's A tier when you can't protect him at all, but we already have some ways how you can protect him. We have Mach 7, which I don't like to use with Yanqing, just because if you're combining them, if you're applying a shield on this character like turn 1 and you have lots of HP on this character, this means he'll be taunted and you might just receive more damage than shield provided by March 7. That's why I don't think they are that good. Again, you can do with this combo, but I don't like it. With Jeopard, this character actually becomes like, I can say SS tier just because he's worth in terms of damage, then Sealy, but S tier, okay, without any problem, again, but only if you can provide shields to actually protect this character, or maybe taunt, which you can provide with your Fire MC. And this is actually a really strong character. Again, with scaling, Jeopard becomes much more useful, but this character is completely free. You receive Eidolons for this character completely for free, and you anyway have to use 2 teams in Memory of Chaos, and as we discussed before, usually you use 1 team, for example, with Jeopard and Bailu, like in the perfect scenario. And the other team might be, for example, Fire MC and Natasha. Of course, since not all of us are whales, usually it will be like 1 team is Natasha, another team is, for example, Fire MC and March 7. This also can easily work. That's why I think this character is really good. This character applies shields no matter what ability you are using, which is really good. Also, this character is good like as just a fire damage dealer. We don't have like a really solid fire DPS characters out of 5 stars, but on the other hand we have a really cheap hook and also Asta and fire main character, which are both really good at breaking fire element weak enemies. So now let's talk about March 7, and she is actually a really good shielder just because you have like a reliable shield with her. You don't have to like charge your ultimate or do something specific like with Trailblazer Fire. You have to apply the shield on all the allies, but with a really small amount, so you have to skyrocket your defense to actually make this shield effective. With March 7 it's really simple. You just use your E and you apply the shield. It's cool, but at the same time you have to consume skill point on that, which is a really big disadvantage. And also she, like, out of her shield is not that useful. Like, you can freeze the enemies, this is good. You can time to time counter attack, this is also good. But you also can remove debuffs, which is really important and was mentioning. But on the other hand, like, this idea of making shield, which at the same time taunts enemies, again with Yanqing, it works much worse than like how Jeopard works with Yanqing. On the other hand, it's like balanced out by the thing that you lose the taunt if your HP is 50% lower. So overall she's a good character, but again, like, other 2 preservation characters are much better. About Arlan, he is not the worst character. It's really hard to say that he's the worst just because, again, he doesn't consume skill points. If you are, for example, using healing characters, you actually can make him work, especially if you invest into him a lot, if you, for example, get him to Eidolon 6. But what's the point when we already, like, this is a problem of lighting currently. We already have a supportive character which we are using, and this character time to time attacks. Of course, Tinyun is not as good in breaking the enemy's weakness as, for example, Asta, but anyway, she attacks and breaks. We already have Bailu, which time to time also just uses her basic attacks because you don't want to heal every turn. We already have Jinyun, which is like a god in terms of damage out of lighting element. We have Serval, which is a free unit, and Arlan at this point has like not that much like sense in investing into. But again, like, in theory, he might be a really good character, but he was nerfed, and also, like, what's the point of using him if we get Blade at some point? That's why, again, I think he's, like, in the best scenario a C tier. Same goes to Sampo. Of course, he's, like, a really good DOT character of Wind Element, the only AOT character of Wind Element, but I honestly can see like serious scenarios where you have to use DOT character of Wind Element currently in the game. Of course, for some fancy builds you can do this, but the other point, like, I don't think that he's that useful. Again, in future it might change a lot just because of Kafka, but if you're talking about like 1.0, 1.1, I don't think there is that much sense in investing into this character. And the last character we have is Welt. This is a really good character. This is like the better version of Asta and Pela at the same time. He has like a break effect, like a really good break effectiveness on his skill. And also he has a really good ultimate. He is overall an agility character, so you can use him as sub DPS. Also, of course, imaginary element, which we currently have the only one character of. Maybe at some point, like, we will get even more characters, because we already know about Yukong and Locha, but again, it depends on you if you're summoning for those characters. And I can say that, like, imaginary is really important. You can't go through the game without imaginary, but anyway, it's really comfy to have like a character of every element just to break the enemy's weakness. And also imaginary is like a really common element to be a weakness of the enemy. That's why, again, Welt is really good. You don't have to invest into him like as your first priority character. If, for example, you have like a good DPS characters or good harmony characters, but he might be a really good like sub DPS or supportive character for your second team. Maybe like for your first team, I don't really recommend using him, because it's much better like to split up your effectiveness, and if you have a really strong solid DPS character in your main team, it's better to use like a good sub DPS character in the second team as well as your main DPS character, just to like not take too much turns to actually finish the battle. This is if you are talking about Memory of Chaos. Overall, I, for example, I'm using just Welt like as my open world farming character, because he is really good. He's effective in terms of skill points. You don't have to like use his ability every turn. You just can use it time to time, and it won't like just drain all of my skill points. I can save those, for example, for Sealy or for Bronya. That's why, again, the character is really good. Maybe he is lacking a bit just because like he can't act as main DPS character currently in the game, but it's not needed from agility characters, at least those who position themselves as like debuffing characters, because we have like DOT agility characters and we have debuffing agility characters, which are really different. And that's actually it. I think, like, of course, as always, there will be some criticism to this tier list, especially from those people who just scrolled to this point of the video without listening what I was telling about the characters. And it's really important to listen, because for some characters I actually like explained when they are, for example, S tier and when they are A tier. Same goes to this character. But if you just scrolled and you think that something wrong with this tier list, feel free to just leave in the comment section what you think, what's your opinion, where am I mistaken. That's all, thanks for your kind attention, and see you soon.